The next video is the next installment for Super Ghosts, and we're up to the most haunted house. Two small boys crept up the weed-grown drive towards the burnt-out old house. "My mum would go mad if she knew I was here," said one as they neared the open front door. "She told me never to come near the place." "She won't find out, Ted," said his companion. "Anyway, I'm sure the fire drove all the old spooks away. Course, if you're scared." "I'm not scared," young Edward Rowling answered in a hushed voice. "Let's take a look inside, and then perhaps we'd better go. If you're not scared, you can go first." "Oh, all right." With his heart beating fast, Edward stepped up to the open door, edged past it, and found himself in a hallway, the walls of which were blackened with smoke. A sour smell which comes from the sodden ashes of burned houses filled the air. The only sound was their footsteps. In front of the boys was a staircase so damaged by fire that it would be dangerous to tread on it. No wonder Edward had been told not to play in the ruins of Borley Rectory. "Come on, Ted, let's explore the rooms." At that moment both boys looked up the stairs and saw a brass candlestick appear above the landing as though held by an unseen person. Next second it came hurtling down the stairway. The immediate action of myself and my companion was to put as great a distance between ourselves and Borley Rectory as we could in the shortest time, Mr. Rowling says today. On regaining our breath, I remember being horrified at the suggestion made by my companion that we should pay the rectory another visit. Needless to say, I declined the offer and took no part in any further visits. What is interesting about Mr. Rowling's experience is it is proved that even though Borley Rectory had burned down, the strange forces which had haunted it for so long still lingered on. Before the Second World War, the rectory, which stood on the outskirts of Borley village in Essex, was known as the most haunted house in England. At one stage in its history, coaches regularly took sightseers to gaze at it, and hundreds of newspaper articles and several books were written about it. It has been estimated that over 200 people experienced supernatural happenings there. Borley Rectory was made famous by a ghost hunter named Harry Price. Since his death, some people have claimed that he exaggerated the happenings there, or even faked them, for the sake of publicity. Others have written in his defence, and the arguments continue, but what must be remembered is that the rectory was well and truly haunted long before Harry Price appeared on the scene. The history of the house and its amazing assortment of ghosts goes back to 1863, when it was built by the Reverend Henry Dawson Ellisbull across the road from the 12th century Borley Church. He and his wife had 14 children, and as his family increased, he extended the house so that it became the rambling building which in old photographs appears exactly as you would imagine a haunted house. The rectory had a large garden with a summer house at the far end. It had been built so the clergyman and his wife could sit in comfort while watching for the phantom nun. She was believed to appear on the long path following the southern boundary of the garden, which was known as the Nun's Walk. The Reverend Bull learned the legend of the nun from his parishioners. The story was that long ago a monastery stood on the rectory site, and one of the monks fell in love with a young nun at a convent in nearby Bures in Suffolk. In the traditional way, the lovers eloped in a coach, but the freedom did not last long. They were caught by church authorities, and for the breaking of their vows, the monk was hung, and the nun bricked up alive in the monastery foundations. It was a splendid story to explain a haunting. The only trouble was that there was not a scrap of historical evidence to back it up. Later, a medium received a spirit message at the rectory and declared that the ghostly nun had been a French girl named Marie Lair, who had been murdered by drowning at Borley in 1667. Whatever the story behind the phantom nun, her appearances were well known to the Reverend Bull and his family. He died in 1892, and he was succeeded as rector by his son, the Reverend Harry Foyster Bull, who was quite familiar with the Borley ghosts. He was a jolly, likeable man who had between 20 and 30 pet cats, all of whose names he remembered, who prowled after him when he strolled in the haunted garden. Not only did he see the phantom nun, but a ghostly coach which was drawn by two horses. The most spectacular of these early sightings occurred in 1900, when the ghost was seen by 4 of the Bull sisters at the same time, such simultaneous sightings being rare. The three of the young ladies were standing by the summer house when they saw a robed figure gliding along the Nun's Walk. 2 of them remained like statues by the summer house. but the third dashed into the house and called another sister to come out quickly. She did so, and when she saw the figure on the path, it seemed so real she was not aware that she was in the presence of a spectre. She walked along the path as though to greet a real person, and the figure melted away before her eyes. When the Reverend Harry Bull died, his place was taken by the Reverend G. Eric Smith and his wife, Mabel, who moved into the rectory on 2nd of October 1928. They were to stay for only 9 months, but it was through them that Borley achieved its fame. The Smiths were soon aware there was something very uncanny about their new home. Those who had lived there before them had taken the Borley hauntings in their stride, but the new residents were scared by the supernatural happenings. Finally, the Vicar sought the advice of the Daily Mirror. The editor had an instinct for a good story and sent one of his best staff reporters to the little village. On the 10th of June 1929, readers of the Daily Mirror opened the paper and read an article which began, "Ghostly figures of headless coachman and a nun, an old-time coach drawn by 2 bay horses, which appears and vanishes mysteriously, and dragging footsteps in empty rooms. All these ingredients of a first-class ghost story are awaiting investigation by psychic experts." The Daily Mirror editor wasted no time in finding a psychic expert to investigate the rectory. 2 days later, Harry Price arrived in Borley, and the Smiths told him how they had experienced eerie whispering sounds, mysterious footfalls, and bells rung by unseen hands. Keys had mysteriously shot out of locks, and a vase had flown from an upstairs window ledge and hurtled down the stairs, like the candlestick when young Edward Rowling entered the hall many years later. 2 maidservants claimed to have seen apparitions, one saying that she had glimpsed the phantom coach which had been seen earlier by Reverend Harry Bull. Perhaps the strangest thing reported to Harry Price was a window which appeared to be lit up from the outside, although the room behind it was always found to be in darkness. The Smiths left Borley Rectory to its ghosts. The house stood empty for 6 months, after which it became the home of the Reverend Lionel Foyster and his wife Mary Ann. It was during the 5 years they were there that the supernatural manifestations became quite sensational. The clergyman kept a diary of them and later allowed Harry Price to quote from it in his book on Borley Rectory. Scribbled messages, said to be written by a spirit, appeared on the walls addressed to Mary Ann asking for mass, light and prayers. An unknown force frequently pealed their house bells and scattered showers of stones about the house. 2 Church of England priests performed a service of exorcism in an attempt to quieten things down, but the unearthly happenings continued. The Foysters moved from Borley in October 1935, and in May 1937 Harry Price rented it for a year. He advertised in the Times for a number of investigators to stay at the rectory in groups and report on their experiences. Out of 200 applications, he selected 40 people who visited Borley on a rota system. During this period, details of the murdered nun came across through the use of a planchette board, a device which holds a pencil and is used to receive spirit writing. The last living tenant of Borley Rectory was a Captain Gregson, who, like those before him, experienced ghostly manifestations. On 27th of February 1939, in line with a prophecy received by a medium, the rectory was gutted by fire, but it was far from the end of the Borley story. During the fire, figures were seen at the upper windows of the blazing house, even though Captain Gregson was the only occupant at the time. In 1943, Harry Price began excavating the cellar of the burnt-out shell in hope of learning more about the Borley mystery. When the dig reached a depth of 1 metre, a skull was found, which an expert identified as being human and female. It was given proper burial in Liston churchyard in 1945, but the fascinating question remained: had Harry located the burial place of the murdered nun? The following year, the ruins of the house were demolished, and today, visitors to the rectory site are often disappointed when they find nothing there. What they may not realise is that across the road in Borley Church, the ghostly tradition continues. One of the first to talk openly about the odd happenings in the church was the Reverend Harry Bull. He said that one day he and a friend were inside when they both heard a tapping sound outside. It was so clear that the man followed it as it moved about the building. Afterwards they went outside but found nothing to explain the cause of the knocks. Since then, there have been many instances of people hearing tapping both inside and outside the church. Other phenomena have included the ringing of the church bell and the sounds of chanting and organ music when the church is being securely bolted. A feature of the hauntings is the mysterious movement of objects within the church. An example occurred when Mrs. Harry Bull, revisiting Bawley in 1947, offered to do the flower decorations for Easter Sunday. On the Saturday, the rector congratulated her on her work, but next morning the flowers were strewn about the church as though hurled by an angry force. The blame could not be laid on vandals, as the church had been locked, and there were no signs of anyone having forced an entry. In August 1949, the Reverend Stanley Kipling arrived at Bawley Church to take a service. Having changed into his gown in the vestry, he went to the porch, where he was astonished to see a veiled female figure in the churchyard. As he watched, it passed between one of the yew trees, reappeared, and then vanished. He rushed to the spot, but, as one would expect at Bawley, there was nothing to explain the brief materialization. Until that moment he had not believed in the Bawley ghosts, but from then on he was convinced of their existence. Again in 1949, two young men, fascinated by the local tales of the haunted church, visited one October night. While sheltering in their porch, they heard curious sounds coming from inside. These were followed at 12 minutes to midnight by the appearance of a black figure moving silently towards a priest's door, leading into the vestry before vanishing. The phantom nun was seen 3 times in the 60s by a Terence Bacon who lived in a nearby cottage. He said she appeared to glide about 60 centimetres above the grass, and an interesting point is that the level of the churchyard used to be higher than it is today. A shrouded figure walking down the church path was seen by a psychic investigator watching for ghostly activity on the night of 20th of June 1970. He used his walkie-talkie to call up 2 friends waiting nearby, and soon the trio saw a light appear behind a chancel window, which then moved slowly toward the altar. They checked that the church door was locked and that no one could be inside, and came to the conclusion that the light had not been carried by a living person. It was an exciting night for the ghost hunters. An hour and a half later, the first investigator, now on the old rectory site, saw the phantom nun. She appeared to drift about 30 centimetres above the ground, and when she came to a fence, she passed through it as though it was not there. Using his radio, the investigator warned his companions, who were on the road by the church, that the ghost was moving in their direction. While they waited for her to appear, a second walkie-talkie message told them that she passed back through the fence, crossed the old lawn, and had stopped about 4.5 metres away. In his report, the investigator wrote that her face had a sad expression. Her skin looked hard and dry, and her eyes were closed. Her garments were grey with something like a shawl on her head. Meanwhile, the 2 men on the road separated, one going into the rectory garden. As he approached his friend, he saw that there was a second figure clothed in grey stuff standing opposite him. Bawley Rectory may have burned down over 40 years ago, but its ghosts continue to haunt the site. And that ends that instalment for Super Ghosts.